Today has recently become a member and is giving his first speech titled The Relearning of the Unlearned. Is a UCF grad, and contrary to what his name might lead you to believe, he is not from Germany, even though it's spelled G-E-R-M-A-N. He's actually from Colombia. Today he's going to be sharing a little background on what brought him to the club, so please join me in welcoming him all the way from scenic Winter Park, Florida, user experience designer and future most improved speaker, Herman Salazar.
How many of you are familiar with the story of Noah's Ark? Well, standing here today reminds me of that story. And before you start wondering, I'm not suggesting that I'm surrounded by animals here. Rather, it reminds me of when I was 8 years old. It was the final presentation of the year, and I was performing as none other than Noah himself. What's funny is that I don't remember being utterly nervous, even though I was performing in an auditorium with 100,000 people. Today, as I speak in front of 300,000 people, things are a bit different. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmaster, and guests, today I want to tell you a little bit about me in hopes that you get to know me better and explore how something I unlearned can be relearned. Before we careen along, I want to tell you a little bit about my dad. He's always been into the arts, and as I grew into myself, I was too. When I was 3 years old, my dad had me memorize every composer on a CD collection of classical music that he had. And when that wasn't entertaining enough for him, he'd take it to the next level. He'd be playing a melody, all of a sudden he'd pause it, and then ask me, what's the name of that movement? Or who's the composer? And who's the conductor? For my dad, it wasn't enough to be a design professor or to have a photography studio where people got their picture taken as if they were posing in the early 1800s or the roaring 20s. He always looked at new opportunities to satiate his creativity. One of my favorite things to do as a child was when I would become engrossed with a movie, I would dress up as my favorite characters and reenact my favorite scenes. I had a whole suitcase full of costumes that I'd pull out at any time and start playing. One movie that my dad showed me and really impacted me was the film Billy Elliot. For those of you who haven't watched it, without giving too much away, it's about this boy in the 1980s England. His dad wants him to become a boxer, but he pursues ballet instead. Well, apparently the main thing I took from that movie was that if I joined ballet, I'd be surrounded by beautiful girls. So I decided to change my elective from soccer to performing arts, which is how I ended up playing Noah. A couple of years later, my dad was approached by a guy who was a casting director, and before we knew it, the whole family was being called for different gigs. One of those included the Colombian equivalent of a Kool-Aid commercial, where I got to show off some of my aforementioned dance skills, and another, an acting scene in what could be described as the quintessential Spanish plot in a soap opera. Two boys duel for the love of a girl by battling it out in a soccer match against each other. My sister, on the other hand, had also landed a role as the daughter of the protagonist in a TV series, but wasn't able to take it because that's when we moved to the US. And I'm sure you've all heard stories of other immigrants and their reasons for moving to a new country, and my journey isn't too different. I remember being aware of our financial and legal situation when we arrived back in 2006. At one point, we even lost legal status and almost had to go back to Colombia. But one instance in particular that comes to mind was my first day of middle school, which was about 6 months since moving. I was standing in the courtyard before classes started, and two kids came up to me with their new back-to-school clothes and started teasing me. "Nice shoes, loser. Where'd you get them? Payless?" And instead of suggesting a soccer match duel to earn my respect, in my limited English, I said to him, "Yeah, I paid less while you paid more," which made matters a lot worse. But Obviously, things got better as time went by. I made a lot of friends and did pretty well in school. When I went to college, I first majored in mechanical engineering before switching to graphic design, which was ultimately what I graduated with. And as I reflect on my life up until this point, that desire to be up in front of people performing dissolved along the way. I think it was when we moved to the US that my accent made me self-conscious and I felt like I had lost that ability to be articulate. It might have been the learning of a new language at such a pivotal point, but while in college, it got to a point where I decided to go into sales to try to improve that. It helped a lot, but I just became very articulate at giving a very specific sales pitch. So ask me anything about a 3-day cruise to the Bahamas. I'll tell you all about it. Now, as a designer, I've had to present my ideas, projects, and stories, and I know I can learn to do it better in a more eloquent and captivating way. So that's why I'm here, because I want to get back to having that confidence of that kid who wasn't afraid of performing in front of a large crowd, and I know you're the crowd that'll help me become a better speaker. Thank you so much.